A person alive today who you would like to spend the whole day with. Could be anyone in the world. Anyone in the world, not a member of the Godhead, but any normal person that you would like to spend the whole day with. Put a few options up there on the screen. Maybe, Lynn, you'd like to spend the whole day with Donald Trump. I don't know. Or Josie, you'd like to learn from Ben Carson because we just read his book. Yeah. Or maybe there's someone else that you'd like to spend the whole day with. Not someone you'd like to grill for the whole day, but someone who you'd love to spend your time with. Raise your hand if you have thought of someone in your mind. Oh, difficult exercise. Do you need more suggestions? Because it's important to the whole message if you choose someone. Who watches Walter Wythe on television? Who's watched him? Would you like to spend the whole day with him? Okay, let's try someone else. Doug Batchelor. Who would like to spend the day with Doug Batchelor? Can we choose him as our example? Ben Carson too. All right. Well, keep that. Maybe King Charles, if you'd like to spend the day with him. Someone you'd love to spend the day with, right? Okay, so keep that in the back of your mind and we'll come back to that. So you've got a little bit more time to think about it. As we look at the 10 Commandments, we soon discover that they're pretty simple in their presentation. You shall not kill, you shall not commit adultery, thou shalt not steal. They're pretty simple and straightforward. They're not complicated. But as we study through the Bible, we soon discover that these commandments are not endpoints in and of themselves, but rather they are laws that give us a starting point for understanding what God's will is for our lives. Consider for a moment the third commandment. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Now, do you think God's greatest desire for us is merely that we don't misuse his name? Is that his greatest desire? No. Do you think it goes deeper than that? Yeah. In fact, Jenna sort of shared on this the other day when she shared about the seal of God. We read in Revelation 14. Then I looked, and behold, a lamb standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his Father's name written on their foreheads. They shall see his face, and his name shall be written on their foreheads. According to 22 verse 4, who will see God's face? Those who have his name on their foreheads. And we're not doing a whole study on this, but we quickly discover when we study the Bible what this is talking about. In Exodus 34, when Moses asked God to appear before him, or go before him, we read, now the Lord descended in the cloud and stood with him there and proclaimed the name of the Lord. What is God proclaiming? The name of the Lord. And the Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord God, merciful and gracious, long-suffering and abounding in goodness and truth. What does God proclaim when he proclaims his name? His character, right? And so we soon discover that the end point of that third commandment is not just the misuse of God's name or falsely taking on the name of Christian. It is having God's character, his name, in our minds and in our hearts. Consider the seventh commandment, you shall not commit adultery. Now, we know that God's greatest ideal for us is not merely the avoidance of adultery, right? Jesus explained a bit deeper for those who were ready. He said, you've heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Jesus warns us that the outward act of adultery begins with thoughts in the mind and in the heart. And he wanted to give us advice to how to avoid going down the wrong path. He says, be careful what you think about. But is the end point of this commandment merely that we don't commit adultery or think about it? Does God want more for us? Right, of course. We read something approaching the end point when Paul speaks to the church at Ephesus. He says, husbands, love your wives just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her. That's something approaching the end point of what God wants for marriage. He wants it to be a representation of the love between him and his people. And if you have that love in your marriage, then by default, you won't break that seventh commandment. Consider the 10th commandment. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, nor his male servant, nor his female servant, nor his ox, nor his donkey, nor anything that is your neighbor's. Now, is the end point of this commandment merely that we don't covet things? Is that the highest ideal that God has for us? What was it? Contentment with godliness? Being generous? I think we get something approaching that end point here, both of the things that you mentioned, where Paul says, not that I speak in regard to need, for I have learned in whatever state I am to be content. I know how to be abased, I know how to abound. Everywhere and in all things I have learned both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. What a wonderful picture. Being content in all things. Regardless of our personal circumstances, God can so change our hearts that we can be happy, we can be content, no matter what comes our way. After all, if Jesus is living in us, what need have we of anything more? Right? And God gives us clues in his word how we're to end up at that end point. He doesn't just leave it as a mystery for us. Yes, it is through being born again that we experience these things, but he also gives us practical advice and practical clues as to how to reach that end of contentedness. Again, Paul writes, rejoice always, pray without ceasing, and in everything give thanks, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus for you. Do you think if you're giving thanks in everything, are you going to be more content? Yeah? If you're giving thanks for everything that you have, are you going to be coveting what your neighbor has? No. And so we see that God works both supernaturally to change our hearts, and he also works practically, showing us how to live day by day. He gives us advice and he gives us guidance as to how to reach that end. Consider the 4th commandment. One of the commandments where people fail to understand this end point is the 4th commandment. They get caught up and they don't understand that God is calling us to a deeper purpose, like he is with all those other commandments. We read Exodus 20 verses 8 to 11. And I know in our Sabbath school we spoke a bit about the Sabbath, but I swear it's not the only thing we talk about, but it does come up. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Now, is the end point of the Sabbath merely that we don't work on that day? No. Otherwise, every unemployed person in the world would by default be keeping the Sabbath, right? Which is not the case. Instead, let's have a look and do a quick study as to what God's greater purpose is for us on that day, starting at the beginning. Thus the heavens and the earth and all the host of them were finished. And on the seventh day God ended his work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done. Then God blessed the seventh day, and he sanctified it, because in it he rested from all his work which God had created and made. The Bible here tells us that God blesses the seventh day. What does it mean to bless something? To make it happy. That's literally the meaning of what it means to bless someone or something. Is to make it happy. So the Sabbath is not to be a boring day. It's not to be a boring day of restrictions. It was a day blessed by God at the beginning to be the happiest day of the week. Isn't that what it says? It's blessed. We're also told that God sanctified it. What does that mean? Made it special. He set it apart for holiness, right? And so God has set this day aside to be happy, to be a joyous day, to be a blessed day. And then Jesus reiterated this idea when he said the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. Jesus is telling us that it's made for our benefit. This is why God gave us the Sabbath, because he knew we would need it. And God gives us an even clearer picture of the Sabbath in that verse we often go to, that passage in Isaiah 58, where God was remonstrating with the people, addressing some issues that were coming up. And he says, if you turn away your foot from the Sabbath, what does it mean if they had their feet all over the Sabbath? They're trampling all over it, right? From doing your pleasure on my holy day, or doing your own things. And he says, instead, you're to call the Sabbath a delight. Isn't that what we read just before in Genesis? That is a blessed day. God says, I want you to call this day a delight. Not just, robotically, but I want you to experience this day as a delight. The holy day of the Lord honorable, and shall honor him, not doing your own ways, nor finding your own pleasure, that is, pursuing your own plans and things for the day, nor speaking your own words. Then you shall delight yourself in the Lord, and I will cause you to ride on the high hills of the earth, and feed you with the heritage of Jacob your father. The mouth of the Lord has spoken. So according to this passage, what is the Sabbath to be to us? A delight. And specifically, what are we to delight in on that day? Delight in the Lord. He tells us to delight ourselves in the Lord. He reiterates in the plainest terms that it is to be a blessing. He says, I'll cause you to ride on the high hills of the earth. What sort of picture does that paint for you? An eagle soaring. I like that. What else does that make you think of? Mountaintop experience. When I brought this up the other day, it must have been at the Paihia Tour study, they said, someone said, you're flying over the valleys, right? And I never thought of that before, but it's like, yeah, I guess that is that mountaintop experience. And feed us with the heritage of Jacob your father. All those blessings are given to Jacob and his offspring are to be given to us. So with that clear picture in mind of the Sabbath being a delight, a blessing, a joyous day, we now look at how we to get to that point. Because it doesn't always start off that way for people when they first come across the Sabbath. It's not always a blessing or a delight. Thankfully, God gives us practical steps in order to make this happen. It's not just a day when we don't work. He gives us practical steps on how we're to get to that end goal of that delightful day with Him. Bearing in mind that the end point is not the steps to get there, but it is that time with Him, that delightful time with Him. So at the beginning, I asked you to think of a person who you'd like to spend the day with. I know it was a struggle for some of you, but who would like to share? Who would you like to spend the day with? Anyone in the world? Whole 24 hours. Oh, that's good. It sounds like it sounds like a lovely person, but for the purposes of our example, it has to be someone living. Okay, we've got one vote for Doug Batchelor. Yeah, on earth. No, none of this Enoch or Elijah stuff, or none of the members of the Godhead. Oh, Cammy Udman, travelling around the world. Oh, Josie too. Walter Vythe. Oh, John Bradshaw up the top. Joe Rogan, if you listen to him. I just thought I'd put some secular as well as some Ben. Yeah. Okay. We've got to choose one person for this example to work. So several people have said Doug Batchelor. Would everyone be happy with that? You wouldn't be happy, Leonie, to spend the day with Doug Batchelor? You want Walter? Okay, all right. Say Doug Batchelor and Walter Vythe were coming to Masterton, all right? Is everyone happy with that? Okay. What's that? Yes, they can bring their wives. Okay. Okay, so say, Jenna, you get a phone call. And it's Walter Vythe and Doug Batchelor and their wives all on a conference call with you. And they say, oh, Jenna, we heard that message you shared the other day, and we just think it was wonderful, and you seem like a lovely person, and we'd love to come and spend the whole day with you. What would you do to prepare for that 24 hours with them? What sort of things would you do to prepare for that day? Yeah, you might clean your house or find a suitable venue. What else might you do to prepare for that day with Walter, Doug, and the others? You have clean clothes ready. Food, right? You wouldn't want to be partway through you're sitting down with Walter and he's discussing the intricacies of evolution. That's a nice, safe one. And you get partway through and think, oh, we haven't had anything to eat, Walter. Let me just go and spend half an hour in the kitchen while you're sitting there in the lounge while I get dinner ready, right? It wouldn't work. What else would you do to get ready? What's that? Pray. You might pray about the day. Yeah, that makes sense. You'd clear your schedule. So you've got no work. You wouldn't say, I can only spend the morning with you and then I've got to go off to work for 8 hours. That wouldn't make sense, right? You've got 24 hours. That's it. You probably would have made some itinerary, what you're going to discuss, what you're going to do in that day. You would have planned that out beforehand. You wouldn't get, again, partway through a conversation and say, oh, well, I guess that's all we can talk about. See ya. What else might you do? You might invite some friends. You want to share this special day with others. Right? Well, I would hope that you would do that if you had Doug Batchelor coming to your house, that you'd bring him along to church. Thank you. Would you, you're sitting down with Doug Batchelor talking about his time living in the cave and hearing all the details that are not included in the online version or in the book. You want to get partway through that and say, Coronation Street's coming on. Can we just flick over to that, Pastor Doug? I hope you don't watch that. Yeah. Maybe that can be another sermon for another day. So you do all those things beforehand. You'd have your itinerary, you'd have your plan worked out, you'd have your food prepared, your clothing prepared, your house tidied, or wherever you're going to meet. You would arrange to share that special event with others. You take time off work. You'd avoid distractions. You wouldn't be watching television that day. You wouldn't be on your phone. You'd probably turn off your notifications. You wouldn't want to be sitting down there talking, because I presume that's what you'd be doing, and then Walter leans over to you, Barry, and said, "Barry, are you even listening to what I'm saying?" And Barry said, I had this job on the farm, and I was just thinking about that. It was on my mind. I've got this motorbike that needs fixing, and I was planning on ordering this part. You wouldn't do that. You'd put those things to one side, wouldn't you? So you could have maximum benefit of that day with Doug, Walter, and the two wives, right? Well, it's the same with the Sabbath. We've already established that the Sabbath is to be a delight, a blessing, a joyous day with God. It's for our benefit. And just like our hypothetical example with these 4 people, God gives us practical steps to facilitate that end goal of that special day with Him. Which is why, in part, why the Sabbath is the longest commandment of the 10. It's the most detailed, because God knew that we would need help in making this happen. He knew that we are selfish with our time, that we are easily distracted, and so that's why He goes into so much detail. There's so much instruction in the commandment itself. But the first thing, most obvious thing, is that He says, "In it you shall do no work." You're not to work. Your son or your daughter or anyone within your sphere of influence, anyone that you have control over, is not to work. The Bible makes it clear that this isn't just talking about your 9-to-5 job. Indeed, it's talking about any job that could be done on another day of the week. The close followers of Jesus understood this. His disciples understood this. After all, they had 3.5 years with Him during His earthly ministry. They spent, say, 150 or plus Sabbaths with Him. They saw how Jesus kept the Sabbath, and they learned from Him. And we read in Luke 23 a prime example of this. Remember, they had all this time to learn from Jesus. After Jesus was taken down from the cross, so this man, Joseph of Arimathea, went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then he took it down, wrapped it in linen, and laid it in a tomb that was hewn out of the rock, where no one had lain before. The day was the preparation, what we call Friday today, and the Sabbath drew near. And the women who had come with Him from Galilee followed after, and they observed the tomb and how His body was laid. Then they returned and prepared spices and fragrant oils, and they rested on the Sabbath according to the commandment. If ever there was a job or a task that you could justify doing on the Sabbath, it would be preparing the Messiah's body for burial. You can make every justification you could, but they knew that that's not what Jesus would want. They had seen his example for those 3.5 years, and so they went and they rested on the Sabbath. They started preparing his body on the Friday. They rested on the Sabbath. All the spices and the herbs and fragrant oils and things they put to one side, and they rested on the Sabbath. And then let's see on the very next chapter, it says, now on the first day of the week, what we call Sunday today, very early in the morning, they and certain other women with them came to the tomb bringing the spices which they had prepared. So on the first day of the week, they come back to the tomb and they do work that they weren't prepared to do on Sabbath. They knew that Jesus wanted them to spend that time with God. There's another interesting story that I quite enjoy, and that is of Nehemiah. Because Nehemiah understood the importance of this weekly time set apart with God. And we read about this in Nehemiah 13, of an interesting event that took place. He writes, in those days I saw people in Judah treading wine presses on the Sabbath and bringing in sheaves and loading donkeys with wine, grapes, figs, and all kinds of burdens, which they brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. And I warned them about the day on which they were selling provisions. Men of Tyre dwelt there also, and brought in fish and all kinds of goods, and sold them on the Sabbath to the children of Judah and Jerusalem. So what were the people of Jerusalem doing on the Sabbath? They were buying, they were shopping, selling. What else were they doing? General business, treating the wine presses. What's that? Well, they weren't thinking about God, were they? That's a good point, Josie. Were they treating it as a special day set apart for time with God? No, they weren't. What influence was their action having on the men of Tyre? That's right. So here we have these men of Tyre. They're looking on at the people of Jerusalem and they're saying, those Adventists, those Israelites are not keeping the Sabbath. They obviously don't care about it, and yet they go out and preach about it. But look at them. They're out mowing the lawn. They're out doing this all on the Sabbath day. They can't really believe what they teach about it. And so we'll just keep coming along and we'll keep selling stuff to them on the Sabbath because they keep buying it. Let's look at what happened next, because Nehemiah understood the danger of what was happening. Nehemiah says, then I contended with the nobles of Judah and said to them, what evil thing is this that you do by which you profane the Sabbath day? Did not your fathers do thus, and did not our God bring all this disaster on us and on this city? Yet you bring added wrath on Israel by profaning the Sabbath. So it was. Now he brings in some practical steps. He tells them all off suitably. So it was at the gates of Jerusalem, as it began to be dark before Sabbath, that I commanded the gates to be shut, and charged that they must not be opened till after the Sabbath. Then I posted some of my servants at the gates, so that no burdens would be brought in on the Sabbath day. Now the merchants and sellers and all kinds of wares lodged outside Jerusalem once or twice. Those men came back a couple of times to see if these people were sticking to what they said they would do. Then I warned them, Nehemiah said, and said to them, why do you spend the night around the wall? If you do so again, I will lay hands on you. And amazingly, after he said that, from that time on, they came no more on the Sabbath. Amazing that they didn't come back after that, eh? Not really. I think if Nehemiah seems like a pretty forceful kind of guy. Nehemiah takes practical steps to help people return to the Sabbath that God had intended. He knew that if the people neglected that time with God, they would fall apart in every other aspect of their lives. and go back into captivity, because that's what led them into captivity in the first place. Now, I was going to say it's not a photo of ours, but not presently. Of course, if you live in a modern household, there's plenty of jobs to do on a daily basis. There's food preparation, there's clothes washing, there's cleaning, there's tidying, there's organizing for upcoming events. God understands that this is the case, which is why he gives us practical steps on how a household is to operate so that we can get the maximum benefit of this time with him. During their time in Egypt, Israel's descendants had been in slavery for a long time, and they needed to be retrained. They had forgotten how to do things. They had forgotten how to prepare. So God labored with them and showed them a better way of living, how they were to prepare for the Sabbath. We know the story of how the manna fell from heaven every day. And what were they to do every day? Pick up what they needed for the day. And what would happen if they picked up extra for the next day? It would rot and there would be worms in it. And then we read in Exodus 16, and so it was on the sixth day, as we know as Friday or the preparation day, that they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers for each one. And all the rulers of the congregation came and told Moses. Then he said to them, "This is what the Lord has said. Tomorrow is a Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you will bake today, boil what you will boil, lay up for yourselves all that remains to be kept to the morning." So they laid it up to the morning as Moses commanded, and it did not stink, nor were there any worms in it. So on that preparation day, on that Friday, God called them to prepare everything that they could. And every week there was this miracle that took place. The food survived to the next day, only on the Friday over to the Sabbath. And for 40 years this happened. So it was ingrained in them. Now, God did this so that none of these everyday tasks would interfere with the Sabbath, his time with them. I'll tell you what that looks like in our house. I'm not giving myself as the example. This is just what works for us. There will normally be a meal or two prepared in the fridge. Normally it's leftover soup from Friday or Thursday or Tuesday, but it's sitting there ready to heat up on Sabbath so that I don't have to think about it. Don't have to gather all the ingredients together, don't have to make something. It's just sitting there, ready to chuck in the microwave, ready to go. Don't have to think about it at all. Perhaps I'll put some porridge in the Instant Pot the night before so that it's ready, nice and warm, ready to go in the morning. I'll have my clothes ready for Sabbath. I will have them ironed if that's necessary, which it never normally is. I will pull them out of the closet. I'll hang them up in the hallway. So I don't have to think about it. Come Sabbath morning, I don't have to go rummaging through the piles of laundry to find this or that. Even though every morning is chaotic for us, it's slightly less chaotic on Saturday morning because it's all sitting there ready. And I'll tell you, that's the reason why I wear a suit to church, because you don't need to iron a suit. It's always ready. This is true. You hardly ever need to wash a suit. I don't know if I should reveal too much about that. You don't. Do you? You don't. You don't, do you? I stick it in the wash once a year and it comes out clean. I wash my shirts. Unless I'm preaching at a different church the previous Sabbath, and then I can wear the same shirt from the previous. I'm only wearing it for 4 hours. It lasts. Anyway, that's not the point. It's sitting there ready to go, and I just pick it up off the hook. I don't need to worry about it My shoes are sitting there. I wear brown shoes because you don't need to polish them so much as black shoes, and they look fine. My bag for Sabbath is ready to go, and it's sitting by the door. My sermon's in there, my Bible's in there. I don't have to run around and gather all those things. It's sitting there, ready to go. You know, there's still things that pop up. There's still issues that come on Sabbath morning, but I've done all that I can to be ready, because I don't want anything distracting me. I don't want anything to spoil that special time. Just like if you're sitting down, if you've got that day with Doug Batchelor, you wouldn't want anything to interfere with that time. And to someone who doesn't understand what the end purpose or the end goal is of the Sabbath, you might think all these other actions are strange or they're legalistic. But when you understand what the end goal is, that time with God, all these other things make sense. They just make good practical sense. But distraction starts in our thoughts. We already spoke of this. If you had your meeting with Walter and your mind was somewhere else, it would spoil the day. You wouldn't, again, want to be partway through that discussion and thinking about, and I'll pick on you two, an argument you had with Julie the night before. You wouldn't want that on your mind, would you, during that special day? We read in Isaiah 58, God says, not doing your own ways, nor finding your own pleasure, nor speaking your own words. He doesn't want us to be distracted by other thoughts or by other words or other plans that we had. So what are some practical ways? We looked at physical things, but what are some practical ways that we can avoid distraction, mental distraction, on the Sabbath? So what's that saying? Not doing your own ways, what does that mean? Your own ambitions? Things that you're doing during the week? Finding your own pleasure. It's not saying that the day shouldn't be pleasurable, because we already said it should be a delight. So what does that mean? Not finding your own pleasure. Yeah, can you be more specific? Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Yeah, that's the end goal. So I think we have to read that in the context of the previous two commands, that we're not pursuing our own plans on that day and not talking about those things on that day. Instead, we're, as Julie said, thinking on spiritual things and talking on spiritual things. Now, what are some practical ways that we can avoid those distractions or avoid mental distractions on that day? What do you think? Turn your phone off. That's a good one. That's a good idea. Write down those distractions, and so you don't have to think about them. They're off your mind. What else? Oh, yeah? What else? Yeah. Yeah, if your mind starts to wander, pray about it. And that's why we have a prayer when we open Sabbath and when we close it, because we're setting aside that time in our minds. And the end goal, again, is not that we don't do these things, is we don't want those things to come in and spoil the Sabbath. So, I put turn off notifications, put away your work or projects that you have going on. Because, you don't want to be sitting there reading, your Bible and then look over and see your stack of work, papers that you've got to mark or whatever. Reconcile relationships. Have you ever come to church and you've had an argument with someone during the week, or there's been something funny go on and you think, oh, am I going to see that person at church? I don't want to have to deal with that today. That's possibly never happened to you, but it has happened to me. So reconcile relationships. Before we have communion, Bruce will tell us to get ourselves right with God and with our fellow men. The Sabbath is the same. It's a good idea to settle those problems beforehand. If I have a problem with Peter, which I've never had nor probably ever will, I want to sort that out before church so there's not that awkwardness at church or on the Sabbath. And especially important is to not leave the day empty. Just like with our example with Doug Batchelor, you would plan things out for that day. You wouldn't leave it empty just to be filled up naturally. You would make plans of what you want to do, what you want to talk about. And the Bible gives us a number of things that we can do on the Sabbath that bring us into that close relationship with God. We're told to come together and worship as a group. We're told to study the Word. We're told to pray. We're told to enjoy creation. We're to share. We're to preach. We're to evangelize. We're to rest. And we're to heal as well. Jesus said it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. And ultimately, this all comes down to that the Sabbath is to be a safeguard of our relationship with God. And we spoke about this morning for those of you who are in the Sabbath school in the hall, the different ways that the Sabbath does this. We read in Ezekiel 20 that the Sabbath is to be a sign between God and us, that they might know that I am the Lord who sanctifies them. Now, the Sabbath points back to God as creator. It is also a reminder that as we rest from our work on Sabbath, so we're to rest from this idea of trying to save ourselves. Instead, we're to rest in the knowledge that Jesus has saved us. It's also a sign that we're loyal to God. Jesus set aside that day at the beginning, and it's a sign that we're loyal to Him. We're following what He said. We believe that He created the world in that way. So we have to think about, do we have the right attitude towards the Sabbath? What is this day to you? Do we have the attitude of those Israelites in Amos chapter 8 who said, when will the Sabbath be over that we might go and continue trading? Or when will the Sabbath be over that I can go on Facebook and scroll, or go on YouTube and watch whatever it is that I watch, or I can get on with my work? Do we have that sort of attitude? Or do we guard the edges of that time because we love Jesus and we relish in that time with Him? So what sort of attitude do we have regarding that? My prayer is for each and every one here that the Sabbath would be a delight, that you would delight yourself in the Lord and spending that time with Him.